And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, CoalitionRadio.us, where links to our Spreaker page, where links to our civil liberties updates can be found. And of course, we're thrilled when people take a few moments from their day to follow us. Independent media is a crowded space. There's a lot of noise there, a lot of white noise. And sometimes it's difficult to get your message through. You sharing our message is a powerful act. It's a political act. It's an act of democracy. And we're grateful for you taking the time to do it. We've got quite an evening here. Immediately after my next guest, who I'll give a full introduction to, we have Professor Victor Matheson from the College of the Holy Cross. He, the editor of the Journal of Sports Economics. You know, the Paw Sox thing has been whipping up lately over the last few days. We're treated to a new logo and a new mascot and a new stadium and the same old pitch. And there's a little bit of revisionist history going on. So we're going to reinforce that message. We're going to get us kind of a signal as to what's going on in Worcester. And, well, the folks up at Halitosis Hall got a big announcement for us on Monday. They're going to figure out a new way for us to lose money, a new way to give away money to the connected, and a new way to pervert whatever crazy financing schemes the state of Rhode Island and our federal government have come up together. So we'll be focusing on that. In the 8 o'clock hour, Lynn Ulbrich, the mother of Ross Ulbrich, will be joining us via the miracle of Skype. We'll be talking about, I believe, one of the most despicable imprisonments that's taken place in recent American history. A double life sentence for an economic crime that should be no crime at all. We'll talk about that and more. But joining us, actually, for the very first time, and we're grateful, we had a last-minute cancellation, so we're grateful she was able to jump on the line and give us an opportunity to talk about her cause, is Allison Chapman. She is with Health Choice for Action. Now, we've spent a lot of time covering vaccination on this show over the last 7 years. And we look at it from two distinct perspectives. Number one, there's the efficacy and the safety of the vaccinations themselves and the heated debate that surrounds it. As important, we cover the legislation which takes away parental choice, takes away informed consent, takes away informed decision-making, takes away your right as an adult or your right as a child to make decisions about their health care. It's one of those onion issues. They're all wrapped up in a nice, messy package. Either way, there are serious questions about the efficacy, the safety, and of course, the morality of inflicting these type of vaccinations on, I'll say it, an unwitting public. I'm old enough to remember folks of my age group actually suffering from polio and what the polio vaccine meant to us as a nation, as a community. I come from an era, I'm old enough to remember when vaccinations were not common. As is so typical in American society, we've swung from one extreme to the other. We've gone from the basics, polio, MMR, now all the way across the line where it seems like our children are getting picked and pocked and probed thousands of times. This is in a nation that took years to decide whether or not the right to try, that is the right as a terminally ill patient to try different medications, was allowed because of the safety concerns of the public. Now we've got the other extreme where there appears to be little or no research done on the safety and efficacy of a number of vaccines, and the vaccination rate has exploded exponentially. But we're here to talk about some specific legislation tonight. Allison, thank you for joining us tonight on such short notice, and tell us a little bit about Health Choice for Action.
Hi, thank you for having me. Health Choice for Action is a group that's lobbying for just that, health choice. We all have the right to make the decisions for ourselves and our children. And there's been quite a bit of legislation that would like to go beyond the informed consent as a parent and make decisions for other people, which only people who know their children the best are parents. So Health Choice for Action and oppose Overreach and the Right to an Education are the two Facebook pages that we have dealing with the two bills that we have going. we have two bills that will be heard on December 3rd, this coming Tuesday.
And I want to jump in and stress for a moment. I should have said we're actually traveling north. This is Massachusetts. And so a lot of the same concerns that our good friend Amy Gardner has expressed here in terms of Rhode Island law is happening just north of the border in the Bay State. So the type of legislation that we're talking about tonight, while it may be focused on the Massachusetts legislature, is critical that we get the message out to our southeastern Massachusetts neighbors, but also at the same time learn so that these kind of abominations can at least be put the brakes on at some level here in Rhode Island. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. This is happening nationwide, worldwide. The choice whether vaccination will be forced and mandated and without any exceptions is happening all over the world. And, you know, in the United States in 1986, pharmaceutical companies were given liability immunity because of injury, because of brain damage and death. And there was, there was a degree of the suing. Whenever you are allowed to have lawsuits, you are able to make safer products because of this. This is the reason why you have litigation, is to be able to go to safer products and be able to keep making technology, make things that are better and safer for everybody. And that was taken away in 1986, and even further in 2011 with Bruce versus the United States, when complete and total liability immunity was taken away from all pharmaceutical companies for the creation for vaccination, for defective design in 2011. So since then, it's been harder and harder to get a medical exemption, and the contraindications are very narrow. So, religious exemption and medical exemptions are the only ones left in many states. And they're trying to take the religious exemption away on Tuesday. That's one of the bills, 3999, each 3999. Representative Vargas put this bill out, and this is to completely remove the religious exemption for vaccination in order for anybody to attend school, public or private, including college and preschools.
And let's talk about that for a second, because the religious exemption in so many states is a code word, isn't it? It's really served to be a catch-all for parents facing a number of challenges, not just religious. It's been a safety valve for a lot of folks. And I know Amy, and I know you folks up there have been screaming to high heavens, politely, intelligently, for a number of years, is warning of the day when they would simply, that we couldn't be the slow lobster boil anymore, if you will, that the government would take away, sometimes in the dark of night, that religious exemption, therefore leaving everybody exposed to that. What are some of the challenges in terms of folks who've been using the religious exemption? What are some of the other challenges they face?
Well, I take a little bit of offense to people like the legislators who say that people are abusing the religious exemption. I think it's all in the eye of the beholder, and it also depends on the laws of your state. In Massachusetts, you cannot restrict or define religion. It does not have to be an organized religion. And it can be your sincerely held religious beliefs. And nobody's to pass a law regarding one religion over another. So, when somebody like myself, watched my 3 children have severe reactions that are known reactions that can possibly happen, yet they don't fit under the very narrow contraindications of a medical exemption, then almost anybody who had severe trauma really grabs onto their faith and their religious beliefs in order to protect their children. That's not abuse of a religious exemption, but that is what legislators are saying are abuse. Other people use their religious exemption for because they strongly disagree with pork being put in their bodies, or fetal DNA, or other ingredients that are really bothersome to their particular religion. So whatever the reason, it's protected under the Constitution in order to get this, to use your religious exemptions without restriction or discrimination. And I think the removal of it is not just unconstitutional, it's unconscionable for the kids who have severe neurological and seizure disorder and whatnot.
Right. Now, let's take another critical point that you just mentioned. Traditionally, most people have thought that these enforced vaccination laws, removal of informed consent, were focused primarily at public education. That's not the case now, is it? Again, another important safety valve, if you will, that's been rolled back. Explain why private school attendees as well as homeschool children might be affected or probably will be affected by this.
Well, in the law as it is now, it applies to all public and private institutions. So whoever uses the law to attend any program, preschool or daycare, where they require vaccination records, this is all under the same law. Now, the second bill that we were talking about, the Roush and Donato bills, called the Community Immunity Acts, those specifically call out homeschooling options. Private schools, they say private schools can make their own laws, like they can decide not to take a religious exemption. So that's allowing a private institution to supersede the state laws and be able to discriminate against religion privately. The second bill totally goes after camps, all that kind of stuff. And what people don't think about, but I do because I just became my son's guardian for his life last year. He's gonna be 20 next week. He will require the same information and the same vaccinations for state programs that there might be. There's very few available, but the ones that are available would have to take this, and we would, if the religious exemption was refused, then he wouldn't be allowed. These are severely handicapped children and adults and children who are typical who are going to be denied an education, private or public. It's just unconscionable.
How long is the process been for this?
The first bill dropped as a late file. In Massachusetts, usually everything, it's a 2-year session. Usually everything drops by the end of January on the beginning of the 2-year session. This was a late file. It dropped June 1st or May 31st, I think. And then the second one was September. So the second ones are the Community Immunity Acts, and those do keep religious exemption, but has everything going through the Department of Health and Human Services, which means all medical exemptions that go beyond contraindication would have to be approved by a man or a woman behind a desk who does not know the child's medical family history, their medical files, and they would be able to have access to their medical information, which they wouldn't previously. And they also would have access to what religions they are and be able to make different rules. And this bill also allows for doctors to decide whether a child is mature enough to get vaccinated without the parent's consent or knowledge. If they vaccinated without the parent's consent and the child went into seizures or was in a coma, they wouldn't be allowed to look at the records to find out what happened. That's how far this bill goes.
Now, the layman will say, wait a minute, don't we all have HIPAA laws about that? So I'll ask you, don't we all have HIPAA protection?
Well, HIPAA laws, don't, I do think it goes against certain HIPAA laws, when it comes to DPH knowing certain information about your medical privacy. So basically, in order to attend school and in order to have an exemption, that you would be coerced into signing a form that would allow you to be able to go to school. So you'd be coerced into giving over your HIPAA rights in order to have an education.
Wow. So your rights are now negotiable in the state of Massachusetts.
Exactly. This bill goes through.
And so you're effectively being held, you're being held hostage. If you want your child to have a quote-unquote, and I use the term loosely down here in Rhode Island, a proper education, they are going to hijack your rights and essentially extort from you this agreement. Am I being overly dramatic here?
No, you're not being dramatic. That's how we play it. We've been telling the legislators this is coercion, plain and simple. In order for your child to gain any sort of education, which it seems like there's no emergency. First of all, we've had 3 cases of measles. We have no other diseases that are vaccine preventable that we have in any emergency situation right now. We are number 1 in the country for vaccination. We're 98.7% double MMR. There's no reason for this bill. So what they're doing is they're going into certain schools, individual schools, and saying that there are certain schools that are higher, have higher exemption levels. But they're very small in number of schools, and they're sort of going at that because they can't go after the fact that we haven't vaccinated enough because we're number 1 in the country. How do you get better than number 1? And it makes no sense to go after people who take this exemption. We only have 1.4% of the population, including partial vaccinated and fully unvaccinated, and medical and religious together. 1.4. We're talking about 1.4% of the population uses this exemption, and they're going to take away the rights of all people in order to keep those people from school.
What do they cite as their motivation? I mean, you've been involved in hearings. You folks have been aggressively challenging this law throughout its sordid life, if you will. How do they rationalize this?
There's several. They say that there are these pockets that fall below herd immunity, but the top 10 pockets, we dug deep into the data. The top 10 pockets have 0 exemptions on file. So that's socioeconomic or language barriers or immigration. There are people who aren't passing it. They don't have the data for. So they're going after exemptions in order to solve a completely different issue. That's one thing. That's really just delving in deep so that they can have everybody do what they think they should do, which is vaccinate. A lot of it's from fear. Fear of disease and fear of all this. And it's politically motivated. I mean, this is a strong-arming tactic that they believe that children who are unvaccinated are carrying something, which is really a perceived risk. They're not, if they haven't been exposed to something, they most certainly are not carrying it.
Right.
And for some reason, that seems to be one of the biggest things to try to overcome is you realize they don't actually have something. And some of the legislators want anybody who's unvaccinated to carry the scarlet letter of A, let everybody in town know who they are.
Right.
And that's a problem because, if you have HIV and AIDS or hepatitis B, if you are actively carrying something, there are laws to protect your privacy. You can go to school and you can be protected. But in this case, they want you as a school to have a scarlet letter on if you go under herd immunity or as an individual. And that's unacceptable. All that does is raise discrimination and fear and mob-like mentality against people who are just mothers and fathers like you and I, protecting their individual children, oftentimes after they've had 105-degree temperatures, losses of language, severe seizures, deafness, all these things encephalitis that can happen are known reactions, but that they do not get medical exemptions for. It's this subpopulation, this minority subpopulation, we know is 2.6% at least. A study out of Harvard Pilgrim says to us that 2.6% of reactions happen. And if you notice, I said earlier that only 1.4% exemptions happen. So we are under-exempting in terms of how many people react.
Wow. Reactions
happen at a greater rate than the exemptions are. So it's important to note that. It's also, there was a study in 2013, 2014, was done in 2017, but the year was 2013, 2014, on emergency room visits. And out of the emergency room visits on adverse drug events, 19.5%, the highest driver of the youngest age, which is 5 and under, 19.5% of the kids that went to the ED for adverse reactions were for vaccination.
Wow.
So people make it sound, I think the government's trying to make it sound like nobody ever reacts. It's 1 in a million, and that's the sacrifices for the greater good. Well, when it's your child is not an acceptable sacrifice for the greater good. you absolutely can use your strong, morally formed conscience and religious beliefs to care for them and protect them.
I alluded to anecdotally in the run-up to the show, the explosion, if you will, in the number of vaccinations. So first of all, how many vaccinations now are required for a child to enter the Massachusetts public school system?
So there's vaccinations and dosing. So the dosing has gone way up. There used to be like 8, and now it's somewhere around 70. And we don't have flu shot or HPV required here. However, in that study from Wallet Hub on vaccinations I alluded to earlier, we're still number 2 and number 3 for HPV and flu shot voluntarily. So there's the voluntary vaccinations, and then there's the vaccinations they require for school. The ones they require for school are hepatitis B, are MMR. It goes up to like 68 in Massachusetts if you include all the doses. It's changed a tremendous amount, and it keeps rising. And there's like 350 in the pipeline still being done. And when all those come on, I mean, can you imagine having a product where there's no liability at all, and you get them mandated? That's like the best business to have on the planet. Everybody's forced to take your product. No one can sue you, and nobody can have an out. That's just unacceptable. There is risk, and we know this. Congress and the Supreme Court has said that vaccine reactions happen. They're unavoidable. Adverse reactions are unavoidable. Injury is unavoidable, they said. And in 2011, Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented on that and said, they left an out in 1986 in order to sue drug companies for defective design. And the rest of the Supreme Court justices said that they meant to give complete and total, even for defective design in 1986. So Sotomayor is like, you're never going to have the technology to make anything better. That just is ridiculous. You completely take away all liability, even for defective design, is just unconscionable. And I agree with her. I agree with them both.
What's astonishing about this, excuse me, is that, and I want to be kind about this because I know you've run into this. We haven't met yet I know you've run into this personally. There is a concerted effort amongst a certain population to make anyone who looks like they're opposing vaccinations at any level to make them look, I'm going to be kind here, foolish.
Crazy.
We know that you're demonized by entire swaths of the population. Yet, everyone that I've met, that I've had on this show about this effort, has been factually based, done a thorough analysis of the statistics, has a grasp and a concept of not only the legislation but the greater law than just about any issue that I've ever seen, and delivers it really from a combination of heartfelt fear and emotion for their children, but in a very adult way. So when you have the opportunity to debate legislators in a situation like this, to whatever degree possible, what is their response? Or do they just kind of sit there and stare at you?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I call it the societal acceptable bullying. Like, bullying is unacceptable across the country almost on anything now, except for if you're one of those devilish people who don't vaccinate. I mean, we're going to raise the fear and hate and mob-like mentality against you as much as possible. I think that it's societal acceptable bullying in a way, and because of fear and ignorance, just like every kind of racism has ever been, any kind of aggressive discrimination that has come along has been because of ignorance. Right. And when we go in there, they tell us, you aren't what we expected, and I go in there saying, I know what you think of me before I walked in here, but this is not who I am. Right. And then I tell them, each one of the severe reactions. My oldest went into convulsions within an hour. My middle one had 105-degree temperature. 3 days later, had a full body rash, started having absence seizures, lost all of his ability to imitate and have any language. He's special needs for life. He's my forever child, which I love to death. I love him so much. He's the sweetest thing. It's the reason I had to move in here, because he's following me around the house.
Right.
And I have a younger one who stopped breathing, and I had to give her the Heimlich after the vitamin K shot. It took me 2.5 years to find out that was an adverse reaction that was rare. So the thing is, we're not crazy. And even if somebody didn't have those reactions and they have really strong religious beliefs not to do this, we have the right, and there is risk. With their risk, there has to be an out. And the medical community is so polarized on this right now. Any doctors that talk about it, any doctors that give exemptions, they're all under scrutiny. This whole system is broken, and we need to take a step back. We need to start thinking about risk assessment and testing people before and after. These haven't been done. This group of children, the Institute of Medicine, the CDC, they all admit they do not know why this 2.6% of the kids, 2.6% adults, why 2.6% of the population reacts, because they haven't done any studies on them.
Right.
And that people don't know until you tell them. And when you have individual conversations, it's much different than when the media is playing out who you are, which is complete mischaracterization.
Or if they take the events of what happened in New York just a few short months ago and turn that into a screaming headline in order to act well as perhaps one of the most highly irresponsible uses of clickbait that I've ever seen. Folks, if you're just joining us right now, Allison Chapman is joining us. She is involved with an organization called Health Choice for Action. It's Massachusetts-based. She's from the North Shore, but she was kind enough to join us here in Rhode Island and the greater libertarian audience nationwide to... and my mic keeps dropping. But if you will, to give voice to the concerns that really the entire nation should be staring at. Joe, how's it sound? Could you grab the... All right, take a quick break right now. 1 second. I'm just going to hold this now, right here, just like this for the rest of the show. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So, because I'm a professional. Wow. Does it not sound okay? All right, great. So anyway, if you're just joining us, as I mentioned, Allison Chapman is joining us. She is with Health Choice for Action. I want to take a second, first of all, of course, to thank our sponsor for this segment, Yacht Club Soda, yachtclubbottlingworks.com, Rhode Island's boutique soda before we needed boutique soda. It's the holiday season. Please take a moment. You spent hours this week preparing the finest foods. Don't use the refinery soda. Use the best. Natural flavors, no additives, crystal clear water, locally manufactured for over 100 years. And heck, if for nothing less, if they're willing to sponsor programming like this, well, they deserve a little love from the audience. So it's yachtclubbottlingworks.com. And, of course, they are in shelves all over Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. Their root beer continues to be my favorite of all time. I would rather drink their root beer than drink beer. There you go. Allison, let's talk about... I'm obsessed a little bit with the sheer volume of chemicals that we're pumping into our kids. Now, again, I come from a generation, like I said, that MMR and certainly the AIDS cocktail and polio and smallpox. These all represented quantum leaps in science, but they didn't occur overnight. They certainly were implemented with a high degree of scrutiny. What's changed now? How is it that the vaccination industry is able to circumvent some of the most challenging laws on the planet for pharmaceutical approval? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, first I want to say, I think a common misconception is the anti-vaccine term. I actually hate that term. It's not one that I am, responsive to it all. I know a lot of people who embrace it, but I am not in any way. I think just like you said, we need to make sure that when products like this come out and they're life-saving, that they get every opportunity to find out everybody that can have them and everybody who cannot have them. And the thing about vaccination is that they're a biologic, not like a regular drug. So drugs go through a certain set of trials. They have usually a 4 to 5 year following period. They have a double-blind saline placebo, where you have, water or something like salt water, and then you get the vaccination. You'd think you'd have that. Well, there really isn't that double-blind placebo in a biologic. So vaccinations are tested against another vaccine that's already out, and there was never a baseline done. So hepatitis B, for example, was only tested for 4 in one study and 5 days in another. So there was no long-term follow-up. And there was nothing done with actual saline. It was done against, I think that one was done against Hib, but they're all done against another vaccination that was already out on the market. And so any reactions that happen from that other vaccination and yours get canceled out. So, it's very difficult to find out exactly who reacts and why. Only thing they test for is antibodies to find out if they've gotten the antibodies from the vaccine to see if what they believe is immunity. They don't test for immune markers. So say you and I are both in the autoimmune, we both have autoimmune disorders in our family, okay? We're the ones that are more at risk for injury. This population should have been tested before and after vaccination and with a saline. We should have known what immune markers were different before vaccination and what might have changed afterwards. I'm a big proponent of doing cytokines before and after, because cytokines have a lot of markers in a lot of inflammatory disorders that happen after vaccination, with high fevers and then regressions and that kind of thing. But they don't do those kind of studies, and they don't do saline. So it's really difficult to find out exactly why. We've asked for that, and they say that it is unethical to do now because it's unethical not to vaccinate. So they will not do the saline testing. And I think obviously there's money involved. I think fear is the biggest driver. Fear and money together, is, pretty powerful combination.
What are some of the other vaccinations? I'm trying to think. I just didn't know that. I continue to walk away impressed with your community's commitment to understanding facts, statistics, realities. Mm-hmm. I, on the other hand, approach this like many parents would, as a complete novice. I was fortunate that both of my daughters escaped, if you will, unharmed. One of their best favoriteest teachers, if you will, spent 2 months in the hospital after a flu vaccination. An adult, and not someone who did not suffer from any autoimmune issues, someone whose health was not compromised. In fact, quite frankly, she was in excellent health and spent 2 months, literally several weeks, in intensive care because of a flu vaccination reaction. So I've seen it firsthand. What are some of these other diseases that they're trying to prevent us from?
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. My mother spent this year 2.5 months in the hospital after a flu shot with metabolic encephalopathy. So yeah, that it happens both to people who have history and people who don't. They really should study this population to find out why. The diseases that they are vaccinating for, the only ones that are actual communicable are like chickenpox, which it was a mild disease. A lot of people still argue whether that was the smartest thing to come on with chickenpox vaccination, because did it explode the shingles population in an earlier age group? That's a possibility, but they put it out because they wanted people to not miss work and miss school, those types of things. Mm-hmm. Then we have the measles, mumps, and rubella. Rubella, actually, when pregnant women caught rubella, they had special needs children. Oftentimes it was children with autism and other things. So, I know why they want to do this, and we won't want to downplay any of these viruses or any of that. But we've gotten too many now. We've got to the point where we're vaccinating for everything. I mean, they're making a vaccination for every, colds, everything. And are they going to mandate all of them? And then you try and make this unvaccinated population sound like they're disease-ridden when they haven't actually been exposed to anything. When there are so many other viruses, there are thousands and thousands of viruses and bacteria and fungus and out there that people can catch. They're making it sound like the only things that are catchable are vaccinated, are ones that you can be vaccinated for. Not everybody responds to every vaccination, right? Not everybody gets protection from them. And the way they're describing it is if those are the only diseases you can ever get. Now, you can't possibly ever protect against every disease of all time. You just can't do it. And if you try to do that, nature's going to go around you. And that's happening too.
I hear it. Now let's take a moment and look at, because we've got legislation that's happening very quickly, Tuesday. So let's go through, there's a handful of bills, and each one addresses a certain perspective. So let's, if we will, start from the ones that are literally upon us, and if we can move out there from that. So what legislation, again, this is in Massachusetts, but remember the patterns that are emerging when it comes to health care, when privacy issues, informed consent issues, vaccination issues, right to try issues. It's a nationwide epidemic, if you will. So what's coming up first? What are folks in Massachusetts need to be concerned about?
We actually have three bills, and one of them's a companion bill, so the two exactly the same, one in the Senate and one in the House. We have the 3999, which is the Vargas bill. That's the religious exemption removal bill. And then we have the Community Immunity Acts, the Rausch and Donato bills. That bill is the one that wants all exemptions to go through the Department of Health and Human Services, somebody behind a desk to decide whether the medical exemption was good enough. If it didn't fit into the very narrow contraindications that CDC put out, those are like anaphylaxia. So if you almost died of one vaccine, you can get an exemption for that only vaccine the next time. If you have heart transplant, you can get away with not doing any live vaccines, but that you have to be fully vaccinated before you get a transplant. And then the other ones are, cancer. So if you have any autoimmune disorders or brain disorders or seizures or you to go deaf, you still don't get a medical exemption after you've reacted. And so these would have to go through DPH. DPH could approve or deny anything outside of contraindications. They could also approve or deny your religious exemption, and they can change the law if they want to. That's what this bill says, that they can change it however they want between both medical and religious. It also allows private schools to supersede state law and decide if they want to take a religious exemption or not, which to me is allowing private institutions to discriminate based on religion. And they also, this is for camps, for colleges, for day programs for special needs adults. They also have something that's very concerning. We had 7 bills that, and like 6 of them, the 2 that are coming on Monday, plus a few of the other ones that we heard a few weeks ago, are trying to change something called the minor consent law. Minor consent, as it stands right now, was written very narrow. You had to be a military person. You had to believe you were pregnant, or you had to believe or be pregnant. Mm-hmm. You had to have parents that were not there, like if you were in the foster care system. And you had to be in imminent harm, like you had to have been exposed to something and needed treatment in order to make these decisions for yourself without a parent around. Now they want to change that, so that if a doctor and a child have a conversation with no age delineation at all, that child can say yes to a vaccination without the parent's consent or knowledge. Some of the other bills just say for any preventative care, meaning like anything that they think that they should be able to get, that they might have been exposed to or might possibly become exposed to, open up the door for basically 70 plus diseases. and all the treatments that go along with that, and allow the child to make the decision. Now, not only does a parent not get a chance to have informed consent, they can do it without their consent, they also don't get to look at their medical records, and they don't have any knowledge. And so if there's any severe reactions, they cannot get proper treatment, medical treatment for that child when they don't know what's happened. So the doctor can make the very broad decisions. And these package inserts and adverse reactions, they're all written over a 10th grade reading level. So if you're trying to say that a 10-year-old can make an informed consent decision and they can't read 10th grade level, there's a problem with that. There's also a problem with not delineating whether somebody's on an IEP or has special needs or is nonverbal. They don't make any exceptions for that. They just say if they believe the child needs it or if they believe they're mature enough. The law is too broad. There's also another thing in the law, in the bill. It's a very complex, large bill that has a lot of pitfalls. One of which is if you want to take a religious exemption, this is the second one. They leave it in there sort of to give you a little nugget, thinking they're giving you something. But this religious exemption, you have to sign a compelled speech document, which basically says that you are knowingly putting yourself, your child, at risk of death or disease, and other children at risk of death or disease. So in order to get to school, to be able to have an education, you have to sign this document that's untrue, that's false, in order to gain this religious exemption. Wow. This bill has so much dangerous stuff in it, and I'm not exactly sure who wrote it. Roush said she wrote every word in there on purpose. But the other people that have signed on to the bill don't seem to know any of the information that's in it. So teaching these legislators what's in the bill is so important. They don't really understand it. Most people are like, wait a minute, what do you mean they can vaccinate without parents' consent or knowledge? And others are very happy about that because they believe that crazy anti-vaxxer parents are nuts and that their children deserve to be vaccinated if they want to get vaccinated without their parents' consent or knowledge. This is part of the societal acceptable bullying that goes on, where they want to take the children's, the parents' rights away. And this is a problem because, first of all, none of us are exactly the same. We all have different reasons. Every individual has the right. And because one person does something with saying, using their religion to do something terrible, do a crime, to do something, you don't take away all religious rights because one person misused something. You with food stamps, you don't take away food stamps from everybody who's hungry because one person bought booze with it. Right. There are people who abuse things. That is not the majority. And you don't take away all constitutional rights because, one person or two people did something you didn't agree with. Right. The problem is the perception.
What can people, we've only got about 5 minutes left. And again, Allison Chapman's joining us from Health Choice for Action from Massachusetts. An important lesson, regardless of where you are in the country, if you're signing on even just now and for our 7 o'clock segment on economics, if you live in Oregon, if you live in Louisiana, odds are something like this is headed towards you. It's part of the playbook, folks. We've consciously avoided on this show avoiding some of the conspiracy theories, but there has to be a moment in time when you wonder why the constant drumbeat. In the case of Massachusetts, there's precious little time for some of this. What can people do?
Okay, you can go to our 2 pages on the bills. One is Oppose Overreach, and that is on the Roush and Donato Community Immunity Bills on Facebook, and The Right to an Education, also on Facebook, and join Health Choice Massachusetts. We also give out information on there. On Oppose Overreach and Right to an Education, you can also sign up for our emails and information on the hearing and when it's coming and what to do. We have testimonies you can write. You should write everybody in the Joint Committee on Public Health, especially the chairs. You can all write a testimony against it and send them to the chairs against both bills, because both of them are a problem, and they're both being heard on the same day together.
Of course.
On December 3rd, starting at 11:30 in the morning in the Gardner Auditorium at the State House.
So busy parents and dual-income families have plenty of time to go there and oppose. It's astonishing with the kind of technology we have right now. Why can't, particularly at a state, Rhode Island, we're spoiled. 40 miles north, about 25 miles west, and we still have people who can't make it to the State House. In your case, you've got people hours away, and these are, the laws affecting their families, their rights are being held mid-morning as if it were some traffic court deal in a city hours away, which they have no physical connection to outside of one person who may or may not be their representative and may or may not have their best interests at heart. As a community, we need to take advantage of electronics to weigh in, and the best thing of all is simply call your state representative. Again, the Facebook page is remarkably straightforward. Just make a couple phone calls. In situations like this, we run into this Rhode Island. You don't get an opportunity to vote on this. You don't. You might be able to vote on the person who will make excuses for it a year and a half from now, a year from now, whenever. But you don't get the chance to vote. Your vote is that email or that phone call, particularly that phone call. Because if concerned parents who certainly want to be the final arbiter, the final decision maker for their children's health care, all right, based on informed consent, based on information, not witch hunts, they need to take that time and raise a little hell, politely calling your state legislator and expressing just a simple concern that this is not the right bill, this is not the right time, this needs a lot more study. The effort, in fact, should be going out to prove the safety and efficacy of the vaccines that are being implemented. That's where the effort should be. It's so perverse, in my opinion, and please challenge me if you think I'm off base here, but the amount of energy that we expend as a society and as a body politic in forcing people to do things based on unfounded, untested processes, information, products, while at the same time we're completely unwilling to subject any of these products to critical analysis, it's staggering. And we're smart enough, we have the skills. Certainly Massachusetts has the resources. They should be on the, literally, for lack of a better term, the bleeding edge of this type of healthcare. Literally the finest hospitals on the planet, are a mile, if that, away from where this hearing is going to be. Yet this hearing strikes me as nothing less than a 21st century equivalent of the discussions of bloodletting in society. Someone should show up with a bucket of leeches, because that's where their science is. And again, we make decisions unknowing because we're unwilling and uncaring as a body politic to follow up and simply do the hard work and do the homework. I applaud, again, you're another representative that I've just met of a community that is bullied, as you point out, is disparaged, and is often made sport of because clearly they're not as modern as we are. Yet every single time I have you folks on my show, and I will continue to have you on my show if I have to do it every damn day, all right, is you come to the table ready to discuss the facts and in an adult manner, without the drama and the chaos that, ironically, the bullies usually are the ones presenting. I congratulate you for your efforts. I hope to hell, send us, if you will, the legislators' names that folks should be calling like hell this week. And I know Amy's going to be in next week to discuss an event she's having in January. Maybe you could talk about that briefly. But we'd love to follow up and do whatever we can to apply pressure here. So now Amy's got an event coming in January. The movie Vaxxed, the sequel, if you will, is going to be. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How familiar are you with the movie?
I've only seen parts of it because I worked all sorts of events around it, so I haven't actually been able to be inside yet. Mm-hmm. But I know that it revolves around HPV at the end, an HPV injury and I actually did a video, YouTube video called Not a Coincidence in 2013 on HPV. And I still have post-traumatic stress from doing that video because, young girls who can't have babies anymore, young girls who died, it doesn't matter if it's 1 in a million. These kids matter. Their lives matter and their stories matter. And they do go into that in Vaxxed. Too, and they also go into a lot of people's individual stories of injury. Like I said, I haven't been able to watch it, but I've seen a lot of the interviews and injuries over the years as well. And they're really hard to watch. I mean, people think the abuse that this community gets when they are like dealing with severe injury and death is really I keep saying unconscionable, but to me, it's such discrimination against a minority population that suffers so greatly already.
Well, again, thank you for joining us. Allison Chapman, I know we're going to have Amy in next week, Amy Gardner, who's going to argue this from the Rhode Island side. I hope you folks will take a moment, like our page, if nothing else, so that you can keep current on our coverage of this issue. And stay tuned, because it's not over yet. I think the next step of our collective civil rights movement, because it is a civil rights movement, is to perhaps look upon some of the victories, some of the defeats that we've had in the last few years here in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, and it's time perhaps to consider going on the offensive to claw back those rights and actually work, because I don't think they're ready for this. Actually start to work to repeal some of these laws. And that may have to be our next emphasis, unfortunately. So, but again, thank you for joining us. Listen, I would ask anyone who's watching from Massachusetts for the first time, Professor Victor Matheson is going to be on. He's in a few moments. He is a sports economist from the College of the Holy Cross, and ironically sits mere yards away from a baseball stadium being built with $100 million of Massachusetts taxpayers' money at stake over a baseball stadium. And yet he's the expert on, if you will. I mean, talk about, sometimes getting the bricks thrown at you. He's the one telling people, well, these publicly funded sports stadiums are losers, and they've been consistent losers, and maybe we need to rethink our strategy on that. So folks who are joining us for the first time, I'd ask you to take a moment, like our page, and stick with us, because we're going to have Allison back. We're going to have Amy on, and we are going to give more coverage to this issue, I believe, than any other indie or mainstream media outlet here in southern Massachusetts and central New England. And for that, again, it's reliant on folks like you, Allison, so thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
We're going to sign off right now. Of course, it was Allison Chapman, Health Choice for Action. We'll have the links up this weekend, as well as this YouTube and this discussion in podcast format. We are the Coalition, a loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live here at the Worldwide Coalition Radio headquarters, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And, of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Again, Professor Victor Matheson is up next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.